of all, good morning to you all. I'm Tina Övel and I will be your host today. And today we have Donna Spencer that will share her knowledge within information architecture. And again, we're happy to see so many people joining. It's just great to see that there's still people who want to join these online meetups. We have a lot of Zoom fatigue, we know, and we are looking into having some of the meetups physically as well. So I hope all of you have had a lovely morning so far. And I guess it's good evening to you, Donna.
It's good evening to me, yes.
Yeah, that's great. So Donna is a product designer at Marker X, and she has extensive experience in user experience, service design, workshops, facilitation, and information architecture. And you've also written 5 UX-related books and was the founder of UX Australia and ran it for 9 years. And to be honest, I'm also one of the fan girls, so just so you know, I'm a bit starstruck today, to be honest.
And then I go make faces at the cat.
Exactly. I love that because then I was just like, oh, she's human, that's nice. So the agenda for today is that when I'm done with all the practicalities, Donna will start to talk. You can ask questions in the QA section here in Zoom, and we will go through them at the end of the session. And today we actually have a bit of more time than usual to have this QA section. So I hope that you are up for asking all your questions related to IA and navigation design and so on to Donna. We are recording everything and we'll share the recording during the next week together with Donna's slides. And then, of course, we are Preely. And for those of you who do not know Preely, Preely is a self-service platform for unmoderated remote user testing and also user panel hosting. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, or maybe if you would like a demo of the different services that we provide. So I actually think that was what I had. So Donna, I think just take it away.
Okay, I will grab some slides.
Sounds great.
Here we go, share. There we go, that worked. Okay.
Yep. Looks beautiful.
Great. Nice to meet you all virtually. I mean, we're not meeting, but I feel like every time I see a bunch of names on a screen, that counts as meeting you all somewhat. And so what I'm going to do today is just talk a little bit about what information architecture is like today and the things that we might need to, know and do for it. But I won't give away the punchline too much just yet. And so as Tina said, I am working as a product designer right now. I've done a lot of design work. I've had a fair emphasis on information architecture in my career, but I don't do it as a job anymore because some of the stuff I'll talk about, as things change, like work just disappeared. IA projects in themselves disappeared. So instead I kind of use the skills I have on all kinds of different projects. And the 2 information architecture related books I wrote, one is about card sorting and one was called A Practical Guide to Information Architecture. The others are about presenting design and facilitation and web writing. So still UX related, but not so much information architecture. And what I thought I would start with is what information architecture used to look like, so that we can do a bit of a compare and contrast to what it's like today. And not just to reflect on the past, but because this actually really matters for a very specific reason. So information architecture, and I'll talk about kind of like 15 years ago, at the time when most of these foundational information architecture books were either in development or written. I think some of these are kind of like 10 years old, some are 15 to 20. But at the time, these were written and were the canon of information architecture as a field. We were primarily working on fairly heavy content sites, so content-based things. So I'll say things because it could also be intranets or document management, content management kind of things as well. They were not necessarily static, but there was often a big static element. Like the things we worked on, and this is like, you know, before Web 2.0, were things where like we would write a bunch of content and we would present that content to people. And so information architecture then was about figuring out ways of organizing the content, of structuring it, of helping people understand, you know, what they needed to do. So it was a very information kind of retrieval tasks at the time. And so what we were often working on then was kind of making, you know, hierarchical content structures, working on things like taxonomies for larger, more dynamic sites. We spent a lot of time thinking about like labeling and what we called things and what went in the navigation bars and how we labeled ideas and concepts and sections. You know, through that period, it was a really practical discipline. And all of these books, and actually like any other information architecture books through this period, were also very practical. And that was fantastic. Like that is literally exactly how it should be, because it was a really pragmatic field with a bunch of people who were new. We were figuring it out from scratch. We didn't have like a big, you know, field that we came into. We were figuring out what navigation meant, how was the best way to present large amounts of information, how do we get people to write for the web. So the books were really, really, really practical. And honestly, that's like, I'm never going to criticize a book for being practical. But what they didn't have, mine included, was, and I've definitely got some theory in my book. I've got a really big chunk of theory around categorization and, you know, how it works in our brain and cognition. So some really, really lovely theory there. But they don't have a strong theoretical base. And so when we like move through time and a thing changes, as it will, and I'll explain where I think information architecture has changed, these books don't necessarily help you. You definitely can pick them up and get things out of them. There are definitely like principles and good stuff in them, but you can't necessarily pick them up now and apply them to a project. And so that means that it's hard to use an old text for a new problem, even though, you know, within them there are definitely some good principles. So that's kind of where I think has happened. And I said, you know, that information architecture at the time was very, you know, much about, you know, kind of content tasks. And since then, things have changed. I'm going to talk to you a little about what I think has changed, and what that means, and how it's changed. And you'll kind of see some patterns here. That was really funny. Look how blue I went. You can see, I assume you can see my face. This blue slide made me look really funny on video. Here's a white slide where I look, I've never seen that one happen before. Wait till I get to the pink slide at the end. I'll be just like, what, all red. So IA now, and even for the last kind of 5 years, I would say, is quite a different beast to what I described there with, you know, fairly static content and us really helping people with content tasks. One of the places that I see information architecture still existing is in this world of headless CMSs. So in a headless CMS, the content management system, you know, holds all the content inside in a big bucket, and it's separated from the display. So then the content can be displayed in theory in a number of places. In order to make your content work in a headless CMS, you really, really, really need to be able to think about the structure of it, and you really need to think about it in abstract outside of its visual presentation. So again, in the old days, we would design things like navigation and page layouts. And often designers would do those first, and then the content kind of had to fit. In this way, we're really thinking like theoretically about structure, and then having content displayed. And that's like just literally a different way of, like a different style of project, a different way of working. And often I haven't worked on a lot of Headless CMS projects. I do see some conversation that they're overused, that they, not all projects need to be as headless as they are, but there is an advantage sometimes in really thinking about structure. So that's one, kind of way that information architecture is different today. Similarly, I'm starting to see people again after this gap, starting to talk about structured content. And there was a really good structured content conference only last week. And here we're both, thinking about kind of that headless thing of being able to figure out how your content is structured and then later on figure out how it's displayed, but also very much about reuse. So not writing a similar thing in 10 places, but writing it once and having it displayed in different parts of a content set, often in ways that you don't actually draw the pages out and draw what the content looks like on it. You have to think about it abstractly and then figure out how it goes. And again, I'm screwing up my face because it's a really different way of thinking. It requires quite a different set of skills to do this in abstraction. And what I'll talk about last is what kinds of skills do we need to to work in this kind of new style of information architecture. We're also, some of us are working with very large collections of content. So that might be really large catalogue sites for e-commerce, really large catalogue sites for things like, museum collections, really large content sites for marketing. So we're often working on things that are huge. And when things are huge, again, you don't go and design every single page. You have to design in abstract, and you have to design, from a kind of structured model. And again, that's quite different to creating hierarchical navigation to display content. It's much more about, again, the deep structure. You can hear the similarities between that, can't you? So, and what all of these mean is that again, instead of designing every page, we're designing a lot of templates. And the time when I realized this had changed so much is I was trying to teach an information architecture workshop. Shouldn't talk with my hands. And I was talking about how, the way that we have to think is that we, kind of figure out these structures so that it goes into templates. And somebody said, I don't know what you mean by templates. I'm like, oh, so templates, and you might be doing that as well, or you might be like, yeah, move on, I know this. But here with it, if you think about a supermarket website or something like Etsy or any kind of e-commerce, again, we don't design every page, we design the product page. We design the marketing page, and then the content that we have has to fit into that structure. So instead of designing pages, we're designing templates. And when we're designing templates, we need to have, our content structured in a way that we can slot it in. Recipes are a really good example of this. If you think about a recipe, apart from thinking about how recipe bloggers, write this much, can't even see my hands, boring content before you get to the recipe. But a recipe is a beautiful structured thing. It has a title, a time, a list of ingredients, a method, equipment that you need, a cuisine, a a bunch of things like that. It's a beautiful structured thing. And so you can design a template for a recipe and the content structure and pour the two things together. And that's what we're working on more often is this kind of, you know, templates for the content to fall into. And what this means is that we're working at really two quite different levels of structure. We're both thinking about like the macro structure. So I've got a site full of recipes. How am I going to help people, you know, narrow down and find the ones they want? How is the overall navigation going to go? How do the, you know, search and filters and narrowing down work? At the same time as working with like that kind of template and page level structure. So we're working at like two ends, both at once. And we probably were always doing that, but it's kind of, you know, it's an interesting thing. I wrote on here, what's IA today, not quite sure how I fit this one in, but content marketing and search engine optimization have basically killed our ability to find good quality content. So, you know, we used to think a lot about how, you know, in information architecture, we do think a lot about how to help people find what they need. I probably should just add Google to this as well. So we used to design as if people came to our website and then we help them from there. Now people are starting at Google. This whole content marketing that's happened over the last 10, 15 years means that, so I'm sighing because it just frustrates me so much. Google prioritizes new content over old, prioritizes long over short. Long isn't necessarily better. It's really hard for us as designers to help people find the things that they need. We are just awash in crappy content. And I know this because I teach user experience design at a postgraduate level. And I'm always trying to go and find, you know, really good quality articles. And I can't find them anymore. I need to find a really good persona template that isn't a rubbish one, a really good journey map article that isn't a rubbish one, and all I can find is the rubbish one. So how my students meant to actually learn anything. I don't know how IA this is, but it certainly affects, you know, findability and how we present information to people and how we help them learn. Another thing that we need to do here is automate relationships. So if you think about, I was talking about recipes before, we might have a recipe site and we've got our, you know, here's our lovely structured recipe in a template. And then we're going to do something like, we want to give people other, you know, things to move forward in case this recipe isn't the one they wanted. We're going to maybe show them some related recipes. And we're not going to go through every recipe in our database and say, well, this sourdough recipe is like these 3 other recipes. We're going to have an algorithm that says how to figure out this. So we might say, if it's a bread recipe, show one bread recipe, one like sandwich fillings recipe, and one soup recipe, or something like that. I haven't done a recipe website, making up as I go. But instead of doing things, again, manually and figuring it out, you're not going to do an e-commerce store with clothing and say, well, for this top, actually this belt and this scarf goes really well with it. You're going to need to do that in an automatic way. And that automatic way means the content all needs to have attributes on it so that a piece of mathematics can figure out what to show. And again, like you can hear, this is really quite different to what I talked about before and what is covered in those books. Again, where we used to spent a lot of time thinking about how we would display content, what sequence it would be in, what things came first because they were important, what things came last because they were less important, what things go in the middle. Now algorithms are deciding both what we see and in what sequence it's displayed. And that changes, dramatically how we curate, how we consume content, the things we see. You can think about this, in terms of anything like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, but also these kind of regular sites that I was kind of thinking about, like a recipe site or clothing sites. The algorithms are deciding what you're going to see, and it may be based on a bunch of other stuff that a site knows about you as well. But there's not so much kind of deliberate hand creation of great stuff. We're getting an algorithmic view of what the computer thinks we should see. It may not be bad, but it might be. And similarly, we're increasingly seeing decisions being made by artificial intelligence. I always think about this one in terms of things like, things like bank loans, where I applied for a loan last year to buy the house I'm in now, and I had to fill out lots and lots and lots and lots of information. And at the time, I was self-employed, and in Australia, banks are it's really difficult to get a loan when you're self-employed. When I'm employed, I just give them my payslip and they're like, sure, we know how much money you earn. When you're self-employed, you provide all of this other content. And then, here's a piece of algorithm, a piece of AI somewhere going, no. Without considering, circumstances or understanding where I really am. It's just like, nah, numbers, see ya. The consequence of this is that where humans, used to have some discretion around considering real context when they were making decisions, and also really considering who they were excluding from decision making. This is just being like when a computer does it, and an AI or a regular algorithm does it, then there's less consideration about who is being stopped from participating, in this economy, or participating in this service, or being allowed to access something. And without careful work, we may not even know that there are whole bunches of people being excluded from services. So again, it's a different world. I don't want to be negative, except that my face goes. Anyway, I finally got a loan, but I had to get a lot of human intervention. And I had to get a lot of hand-holding from an individual who did a lot of work for me to get my loan. But I was already paying off an equivalent loan. There was no doubt that I could pay it. I just fell into this hole of algorithms in the bank that just meant the computer said no, and I had to go. But yeah. Anyway, it was a very stressful time. I don't like banks at all. All right. So what's common to these kind of projects and what I think information architecture looks like today? You've heard me say a bunch of these already. A lot of like how to do that work is about understanding both concepts, so ideas, and the relationships between ideas, and also the relationships between content. Really understanding, and I'm doing this with my hands, really understanding in an abstract way what goes with what, and being able to mark that on the content so that we can use it in that kind of templated, automated way. So all of that work really needs an understanding of the relationship between ideas and content. We really need, you know, in all of that, there is still like, there's a lot of structure. There's a lot of figuring out how things are set up and related. And there's a lot of organizing still, especially given that, you know, a lot of the, what I was talking about there are kind of large amounts of content. We're still like, you know, still the work is all about communicating with people and helping them understand and helping them make good decisions. You know, and there's so many ways that can play out in projects. But that's still a fundamental piece of all those project types. And as I said, as I was going through that, a lot of those are built on rules and algorithms, not necessarily built by hand. So what then are the uncommon things, the things that are different in that, you know, kind of big set of IA kinds? If those made sense to you, and they may not, because if you haven't come across a project like some of those, you might be like, I don't know what you mean. But for the ones that, you know, that you understood, you can probably see that they're really different project types. So, you know, working with a team who's doing something, you know, with AI is really different to working with a team who are trying to, you know, work in e-commerce and make e-commerce work really well, is really different to working in government, trying to help people make decisions. They're all really different. And that means that where, you know, the books that I mentioned at first, you can pick those up, and the practical nature of them meant you could say, okay, we're building a website. I'm going to start at the beginning of this book and I'm going to read it, and it'll tell me pretty much how to do things. The style of project that I just talked about, because they're, I mean, I was talking in abstract, because they're quite different, there's not a lot of consistency. So it's really hard to say, do things like this. That's why I said before, I was trying to teach information architecture last year. And I've been teaching information architecture since like probably 2002. And I'm at the point where I can't teach it anymore because all of those project types are so different. I don't know what I'm teaching anymore. So I was really in a kind of in a mess trying to figure out what I was telling people, because I was using my old kind of teaching methods, and I'm sure I was helpful somewhat, but I know that I wasn't kind of successful like I used to be when I could teach something in a bit of a how-to way. There's then also not a really consistent entry point to this kind of work. So, you know, in the you know, IA yesterday days, you could start on a small website, and then you could get a new project and work on a bigger website, and then you might work on a bigger one or a different kind of style or in a different field, and there was a consistency to them. Though if you tried, I don't even know how you would start to tackle a project like the ones I mentioned if you were, you know, close to a beginner. There's no easy way of saying, well, this is what a small project looks like. It's like research where you can say, okay, here's a straightforward study, learn about that, and then you kind of build it up. So that's kind of a problem. And in a lot of those, maybe not all, but also because, you know, information architecture kind of faded in prominence, people who hire product owners, other people on the team aren't necessarily going to know that, like, information architecture skills, those structuring and organizing and labeling and, you know, marking content with attributes. They're not necessarily going to know that that's what you need to do in the projects. So, and certainly this is why I think, yeah, a lot of the large sites we use now, especially like e-commerce sites, are really, really, really hard to use because there's probably nobody in a team who thinks about helping people, you know, understand, make decisions, filter through content. So it might mean that you already have a, you know, a set of, you know, good IA skills, and you're going to have to communicate to other people. This is what I have to do. Communicate to other people exactly what the skills are and how they affect the content and how they play out in a project. And I was working on a government project most of 2000. And, you know, even with and it was definitely a project that needed information architecture, and they knew it. So they'd hired me for it. But I still spent a lot of my time trying to not use jargon to explain these ideas around, you know, categorization and structure and metadata on content and principles and rules-based design, and giving them lots of examples. I spent more time explaining what the work was than actually doing the work. And that's me with, you know, a ton of experience. So this is all hard. So if you're, you know, potentially working on a project that you feel like is one of these and you're feeling lost, that is exactly why. It's not you, it's a world that doesn't see the structural elements and that doesn't see the underneath things, that only sees the surface. I don't do visual design. So people are like, well, what do you do as a designer if you don't make things look good? And yeah. So the things that I think are the skills needed to do those kind of projects, absolutely, positively, research skills are still relevant. So we still need to understand what people already understand, like where they are. Are they like beginners in a kind of topic? Are they experts? What kind of experts are they? What do they know? Where are they now? Like that's one of the really important parts of helping people, you know, get from a place where they don't know something to a place where they do know something, is understanding where they're starting from. And also, you know, what they need to understand. I don't know that regular user research really focuses here. Regular user research, I see a lot of focus on tasks and not so much of a focus on like learning and understanding people. So this is still a really important thing for us to do, and an important skill. So researching to understand, you know, people's information needs are really important. The other thing that's still really important is really understanding how people think, really understanding what their like mental model is of a content area, of a task they need to do, of like, you know, how to approach something. This is still crucial and always was. So those skills are things that we, you know, probably many of us have and are still amazing and important. The other skills are these real structural ones. So concept modeling. What concept modeling is understanding a topic, a domain that you're working in, and being able to describe it in abstract and describe the relationships between things, and communicate that to other people. So this is still a really important skill. And this is like the thing I like most about a lot of kind of analysis and information architecture work, is figuring out how the world works for a particular topic. We also will still need to do content modeling. So that's different to concept, where concept is what are the ideas in this topic. Content is what are the pieces that we're producing, sharing, communicating with, and how do they relate to each other? I said before, this macro and micro. So how does the content work out, you know, at a really high level? What are the main chunks of it? How are we going to design like kind of main navigation and the main pieces of a domain? But also that micro level content, like the really nitty-gritty things on a page. Like you can see this in a recipe, the you know, how long does it take to prepare? How long does it take to cook? They're like really little micro pieces of content. And it may not be that a person has a skill in that really broad modeling and the really detailed modeling. Like that might be two sets of brains, because it doesn't always fall naturally in one head. We need to understand how categories work. This is the part I said is the theoretical part in my information architecture book, all about how categories work in our brain, how the way you can go read this later. I'll tell you how to get it, and it's free. The way how we think about how categories work and how they actually work, how people develop their own, you know, these are called folk taxonomies, their own ways of working and thinking about the world. So this is all still important. And then classification. So exactly how, what are we going to use to bundle up a set of content? How are we going to classify it? How are we going to do that kind of detail of, again, with recipes, like what are the actual lists of cuisines? What are the actual lists of cooking types? How are we going to classify all those? So these skills are all what we need to do that work. But you'll also kind of see these are fairly conceptual kind of skills, where the research one is pretty practical, like, you know, doing research. These are, it's going to be weird to say to people, I'm really good at this, because they're like, yeah, what? And taxonomy development also fits into working with big content sets. So that's where I think we are right now. I would say if you asked 10 information architects, people who still like think about this stuff, where we are today, we would all have a different lens on it. And we'd all have different lens about where we got and why we got there, and that's okay. I'm not trying to present the world a definitive view. This is just my view of how things have changed and what we might need to do. So I think we're up to questions. Look at my face. I think I'll take off that slide.
All right.
I don't think I'll use this pink slide again. It's in my company's brand, but it's really bright.
It's very bright, and it's, yeah, the reflection is like quite crazy.
It's quite crazy.
But thank you so much, Donna, for an interesting talk. And again, all of you behind the screen, you can ask questions in the Q&A section. We have some coming in, but I would actually like to start the ball, because I was quite affected with the stuff you said, because I've been so frustrated with a lot of, in general, when I meet SEO people, because they want to do something else than I want to do as a UX designer, right? And I was so struck by you say that the longer text, they want that, and that's not always good, because sometimes it's shorter. And I'm quite famous for simplicity in general, and also in text and so on. So everything I write does not perform that good in Google. And I'm so annoyed by Google for that. So my question is actually, do you think that information architecture is dying due to automation?
I think it's I don't want to say dying, because the skills are still needed. Yeah. I think it reduced in popularity for a bunch of reasons. The one I was partway through talking, and I'm like, I missed a thing on my IA Today slide. The other thing that happened is we went from doing kind of content-based websites to applications. So we started turning everything into software. Both making apps for devices, but also like literally. So like when you do a content-based website, you can create that with very little technology and a bunch of writers. Yeah. But we kept throwing software people at our websites and our projects, and software people want to build things, of course. So we end up with all these really application-heavy ways of working, including where we like drive people through decisions instead of letting them kind of poddle around in content and making decisions themselves. So that's also a reason why information architecture became less popular, but also like the people in it moved on to other things. Like user experience started getting more popular, and we all love the talking to people and understanding users side. A bunch of people kind of went more into strategy. So the kind of middle just fell out of it as well. So that's part of why I also think it disappeared. I think the Google thing and like these nasty, weird, long, terrible content, like this is all SEO and marketing driven. So, I mean, everybody wants attention on their site. And, you know, one of the ways that people were told to do it was to make more content. And now the thing, like one of the things I've been seeing in the media in the last couple of weeks is like much more about, you know, AI writing content. You know, and this is, I don't know, I like simplicity. I want a short, sharp article. I do not want to, and like people laugh at the recipe bloggers. It's a joke about like the long, rubbish, bullshit content before you get to the recipe. But it works. Because people are going from Google and starting from Google, not knowing what websites to start with.
Yeah, exactly. So we have some questions coming. We have one from Shannon, and she asked, how does the AI decision making relate to IA? I understand the point about it affecting people's ability to participate in, e.g. the economy, but not understanding how that relates to IA. Do you mean it affects that content, what content they are able to see offline, online?
Yeah, I said that and I didn't explain the connection very well. So the way I think it relates to IA is when we have a bunch of algorithms making decisions and decisions on either like my loan application kind of decision or stuff like LinkedIn and showing how the algorithm shows content. And we don't have people involved who care about users, who understand how to help people understand, who understand like the consequences of categorizing people. When we don't have these people involved in projects, we end up with systems that are hostile to humans. That's kind of my bridge, is that those of us with skills of understanding categories, how categories are made, how people are categorized, how these decisions get into systems. So if I'm working with an AI team, I'm going to keep injecting humanness into the process and hope that the outcome is more humane. So that's where I was going, but I really didn't explain it because I explained it quite quickly. Shannon, I hope that is helpful.
I definitely think so. So Sheldon is asking, regarding goal setting for design projects, a lot of time goals are tied to business value, e.g. increasing sales by 10%. Unfortunately, this is not based solely on design, but on many business functions. How can we define better goals for design projects?
Well, there aren't such things as, I think personally, there aren't such things as design projects. Designers work within often product teams and should be contributing to decision making in those product teams. In a good, well-functioning team, the whole team will be coming up with that percentage, not just a product manager. Doesn't mean that many or any teams are actually well-functioning. That means that those of us who are doing research, like structural design like this, are all involved in setting the goals. And we set them based on, the skills of a whole team, including the skills of the people who are talking to the users, not just a product owner. If a product owner just says, increase by 10%, then your job is, okay, well, let's figure out what that means. What does 10% mean? Which 10%? which users, I don't know. So then you start really unpacking that. But yeah, I never think about things as design projects. Design skills work within a product usually.
Yeah,
Or
I think Ms. Jensen also Sheldon asked about this, like increase sales by 10%, and that's difficult, right? Because also in the organization I worked in, like, what does that mean for the product, and like what should we do? Of course, it's easy if there's issues with the product. I've worked a lot with product with connectivity issues, right? So of course we could say, okay, we need to have better connectivity there, or we need to have the better interface so people understand it. But going to the whole like sales, that's not just us, right? So it's a whole team effort. So we have Morten asking, how would you describe the difference between IA and navigation design, if you see any, or maybe more correctly, where do they differentiate and where do they overlap?
Yep. So I did a lot of hand waving. I'm doing this when I'm thinking about IA. So I'm thinking about the structures. I'm thinking about the content and how the content relationships work and the templates and the things that we might need to display. So if I think about IA, I'm thinking about all of those like structural elements and the relationships. And then navigation design is how do we represent this via a screen, usually. Because we could be writing a book, but how do we represent this via a screen in a way that we can help people do the things they need? So then IA navigation design, so you might have, there are tons of places where we do navigation design. We've got our normal kind of things where we might have like navigation bars, menus. We've also got filters, we've got like related links, we've got links in page, we've got things like tags on content, we've got search results and the ways of, of navigating via search. There's probably some other things. We've got things like landing pages and cards and all those. All of those are navigation design, and they need to be built off an information architecture. So you can't design navigation or page layouts or links or templates before you've figured out the structure of the content. So you can't like pour content into a page. You need to figure out the structures first.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Linetta is asking, how do you see IA in relation to Web3? Like, will things improve according to IA, or will it be worse?
Web3 is a big thing. It's not just one thing. I'm working in Web3 at the moment, so at least I know how to answer this. I'm working in blockchain and NFT part of Web3. I'm not working in metaverse. I'm not working in like decentralized finance part of Web3. IA still, so like, and this way, like you think about all the project types I had, Web3 has tons of different kinds of projects. So when I'm working on, as I'm right now, a NFT art projects, we're still going to come up with navigation. We're still going to come up with metadata. We're still going to help people to find content based on attributes. It's exactly the same for that kind of element. I haven't worked in metaverse at all, so I don't know what the IA bridges are there yet at all. New things like Web3 sometimes need exactly the same as the old things, and particularly they particularly need exactly the skills we already have with user research. They still need all of the skills that we still have with conceptual design, with strategic design, and with interface design. And some of the projects will need more information architecture than others.
Makes sense.
I don't think it'll necessarily improve.
Okay, shoot.
I don't think there's anything inherent to Web3, to either the decentralized part of it to the, inspectable blockchain part of it, to the easy financial transaction part of it. I don't think any of that is necessarily going to be better because of IA.
Okay, so Shannon is asking, what is the difference between categories and classifications?
Yeah, so I said that one quickly as well. And even when I said it, I thought, do I need to explain this better? So categories are theoretical. So I can see some things in my room. I can see a cat. Cat is a category. It's a category of, look at this. I can not only see a cat, I can see a fluffy cat. So fluffy cat is a subcategory of cat. Look at him. I can also see a audio device. There's a category. I can think about categories in terms of topics as well. I can think about a category of recipes. So the categories are and this is why I say concepts and ideas. Concepts and ideas and categories are all things that happen in our brains and are the way that we bundle up stuff in the world to make it easy to think about instead of having to think about every single item that we see. So that's a category. A classification is a way that we implement categories in a practical sense. So we might have a classification of cats, and the classification of cats may have fluffy cats, baby cats, cats with short legs, cats with no tails. That might be our cat classification. Similarly, recipes, we might have our classification around cuisines. We might have a classification of like types of cooking. So they're the practical side of the categories that are like the concepts in our heads.
Makes sense.
And sorry about those. I know that also like these are things that may not translate super well.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, but it is a bit fluffy, right? Because like
it's fluffy.
Yeah,
it's all fluffy because we all think in a different way, and like
exactly.
And this is like one of the really interesting things for me working with people from around the world is I get to understand how you all think in different ways according to your cultural background, where you grew up, how your family thinks.
Yeah.
And that's why it's fluffy, because the way our brains do things and the categories we create are built on our experiences. So yeah, it's really fluffy.
Yeah, exactly. And also like I teach, right? And our area is just like a complete fluff, right? So we can put 2 lines on and say, okay, this is the result. This is how it's done, right? This is how you should think and so on. So everything is just like up in the air, and to you, this will make sense. But to me, maybe this will make sense instead, right?
I read this really interesting article this morning that was it was really funny. I don't know how to find it again, but I probably can. It was an article about how Swedish people don't feed uninvited children. So if you have, the way I read it was that if guests come to your house and they didn't say they were going to bring their children, then you probably won't feed the children, because that's the way that you think. I'm not criticizing this at all, but of course the world exploded and was like, what? Because like culturally, some cultures, you would literally never let somebody walk out of your house without offering them food. Some cultures, you need to offer them food like 6 or 7 times. You just do it and do it and do it. And you would always have food set aside in case somebody turns up. And this is all a super, super interesting example. Whether it's true or not, I'm not going to stereotype.
Maybe we should ask, are there any Swedes on the line that can confirm this? And to be honest, like here in Denmark, I've never heard it, but you never know. Maybe it's just like a statement saying, this was child-free, and now you start bringing them, so they are like just starving.
It would make sense to me, because if I'd invited friends around and I knew that I had 6 people coming for dinner, I would prepare about that much food.
Yeah.
And it might be fancy food.
Exactly. So it would be like adult food.
And if they bring their 5-year-olds, I just may not have anything for them.
Yeah.
But the article was also like, well, we don't, because the parents might have fed them already or might feed them later.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And it was a really interesting example of how we think differently.
Yeah.
And this is why we need to do user research when we're not working within our own culture, because we think really differently. There's like time is another one that's really interesting, and politeness is another where culturally we have different expectations.
Yeah.
So German people will turn up on time. Italian people in general will turn up when the conversation that they have been having is finished, because the relationship with the person is more important than being punctual.
Yeah.
I'm on the punctual side. I would be like, okay, look, I've got to go. I love you.
Yeah,
but this conversation is over because I told somebody else I was going to be somewhere else.
Yeah, I promised something, so of course I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yeah, but that is not universal.
Yeah, no, but I think that's quite interesting, because I know there's been some studies, because we are in Denmark, right, and we come from the Vikings, and it was so important that we actually turned up on time. So if we went on like a ride, then it was very important that, okay, in 3 years' time we're meeting on that coastline, at noon.
Right. Okay, so
there
Danes
might be some biological stuff as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's so interesting. I think we might have time for the last question here. So Sheldon is asking, how do you approach designing interfaces for comparison for mobile screens?
So first, you think, is this the best place for this task? Do people really want to do a complex comparison on a mobile screen? And if the answer is yes, then you need to dig a level deeper. You need to go, okay, people want to do a comparison, on a small screen, whether it's because they're commuting, whether it's the only device they have access to, whether, that's just the normal way of being. Okay, yes, we definitely want to do a complex comparison on a small screen. What do we need to know? Like, what are we actually comparing? So this is very much an IA question. Which elements are the things that we need to compare between? So you might, once you've answered these questions, you might be down to, well, actually, I just need to know location and price. I don't need every other attribute to be on this screen. So then the smallness of the screen becomes less of a problem, because you've solved the more detailed problem of what are we actually trying to do here? And you've also asked is this actually the best place for this task? And if it's a complex comparison, in a kind of work setting where people are, have access to a large screen, then they might actually prefer to do that where they've got space. Really understanding, like, you might just need to show two things.
Yeah.
So it's not about the layout, and it's not about, can I fit skinny things into columns? It's, what do I need to do here that's different to what I need to do over there? So I just said it depends. Yeah.
And I think that's the word I use the most. It depends, to be honest. So time is up, but thank you so much for a very interesting talk, Donna. I definitely believe that, like, I'm quite wiser going from here. And it's also just nice to hear that you're struggling with some of the same issues that we are as well. So I'll just wrap up. So we are recording everything, as I said in the beginning. So all of you, of course, will receive a recording of the talk afterwards, and also Donna's slides. And again, for you, those of you behind the screen that does not know Preely yet, or can see that there might be a fit with us, please reach out, and then we'll see if we can make magic happen. Our meetup is going on holiday now, summer holidays, but we will be back in late summer. So keep an eye on our SoMe channels for when that happens. So I think I just want to say thank you for now, and thank you for joining, and have a great summer, everyone. And thank you to you, Donna.
Thank you.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.